one of the things that I discovered in my um, emotional recovery process as someone who dealt with multiple abuses in childhood that completely affected every aspect of my life. Um, and one of the things that I'm finding right now as an adult is even though I am physically disconnected from all of it, have not seen those people in years, I am in the company of people who love and support me. I have carefully curated the relationships that I had with people before this that were unhealthy, right? So like I sat down in that chair and let it out and we started to make those connections to this is what happened with that particular individual that had influence on your life that started this cycle of you believing these things about yourself. And although you have these accomplishments in the world and you've done all of these things, it was the prevailing narrative in your head that was running the show. So you weren't even aware that you were making these decisions
Right,
until you had your bottom moment. And your
right.
bottom moment was like, oh, but no, see, you're not going to experience this anymore. However, with all of these tools I have over here, I don't have the toolkit to deal with this. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. So I feel like we live in a society that tells you take a pill. Not that I'm against anybody being medicated for any of this, but take a pill, have an affair, go spend your money, all of this external stuff that tries to make you feel good in the moment. It's like cranes in the sky salons, right? It's like, we want to fill it with something, but that wasn't quite it. So, one of the things that I think about when I think of all of this is how difficult it is for someone to really face sort of the original sin. Like the first person that told you something about yourself, that you were unworthy, that you weren't pretty, that you weren't smart, that compared you to your dad because they had a bad relationship with them and they berated you for whatever it was. Like whatever that first person, that first experience where they used you as a punching bag for whatever reason, that is the thing that kind of codified itself in your brain and in your body that you were always responding to. So I think what I'm asking you in this very long-winded way of telling you part of my story is when people come to you and when people start to consider am I somebody who has been the victim of emotional psychological abuse, no matter what stage it is, hopefully younger than better, but at any stage, like what is it that in their brains, in their experience, they're finally coming to grips with? Like what are they finally being like, okay, I need to go see somebody because like this track keeps running in my brain and it keeps showing up in the physical manifestations of what I'm experiencing. And I know that I have more control than this, but I can't quite get to it.
So the relationships that we have with our parents teach us how to relate to everyone else forever. When you are 0 to 2, you are in a phase, and there are psychological theories about this, but you are in a phase where you're completely dependent upon the person who is caring for you. And for many people, that's a parent. And you are developing trust. And the parent represents not just trust in self, right? So your mother and father represent not just trust in them for you, that the world is safe, because your mother and your father are your world when you're 0 to 2. There is no one else. And then as you grow, that world gets larger and larger. But at the beginning, the people who are raising you, it doesn't have to be a biological parent, but the people who are consistently there for you to provide you with food and clothing and shelter. And what we know is that most importantly, cuddles and nurturing. Those people are teaching you what to expect, what to accept, what to look for in friends and partners. So when someone comes and they're saying, what's happening? Your question is, what happens when someone just says, I got to see someone? Well, sometimes they notice the pattern. I keep dating the same man. He looks, one's taller than the other, one's rounder than the other, one's lighter than the other, but it's the same man. Or, I'm attracted to the same type of girl. So they notice the pattern themselves. And that's really great because that means that there's a level of insight that a person has. Sometimes someone says to them, have you ever noticed, don't you think that like she's just like her? seems like they're almost the same. So we get the feedback from our environment, and that means we have people who love us and are looking at us from an external view and saying, okay, this seems a little odd. This is now happening twice. So that's one way that brings someone to a therapy. Another thing that brings people to therapy is the the notion that they're just tired. They're tired of going around and around in a circle and ending up in this, you're going to end up in the same place. So they want to know, like, what's going on? How is this continuing to happen? And they don't know about, it could be just a really bad relationship, one really bad relationship. There is no pattern. What therapy does is help you uncover those patterns. So it sounds like this person is a lot like your dad. And it's hard to make those connections because we often see things in silos, right? Like, oh, that's my dad, and he was physically abusive. And Kyle is never, like, he would never touch me. But then when you go back, you start to think about ways in which Kyle has degraded you. So he hasn't degraded your body, he's just degraded your mind, and your ability to believe in yourself, the way you think about yourself. um, and so in that case, denigration is denigration. It's something that we know about. We learned this from back in well, a long time ago, but it was definitely confirmed around the 80s. And Ann Kaiser Stearns really does um, a great job of talking about this in her book about grief. We used to think that when you lost a job, that was a different type of grief than when you lost a parent, than when you lost a pet, than when you lost, uh, some money. And what we now know is that grief is grief. And similarly, in some ways, abuse is abuse. It impacts us. When someone's hitting on you, you think poorly about yourself, right? When someone's calling you names, you start to believe that. So there's a pervasive undercurrent of erosion of self in all abuse. And when people start to pick up, like, I used to be so much fun, and now I don't want to do anything, that often brings them to therapy. One thing
Right.
I want to say that you mentioned is, that may be helpful to our viewers is, um, one of the first things I do with patients when they come in, and this is their history, is I talk about the difference between victims and survivors. So victims are people who succumb to their injuries or their abuse or their attacks. And survivors are people who live to talk about those same things. So one of the things I do right away, as soon as there's enough of a solid relationship, is I talk about why they are survivors. The mere fact that they are sitting in front of me means that they have survived. So they are not victims of their circumstance because they have lived through it and they are here. And if they're with me, that means that they've lived through it and they are trying to get healthier from it. They're trying to recover from it. That's survivor mode. That is not victim mode.